Welcome to Time for Change Kitchen. I'm Danielle Bassoni. Today we are going to make fermented vegetables. I use these vegetables as a condiment for this wonderful sandwich I've created. It has soft and sweet vegetables like avocado and sweet potato and marinated beets. And on top of that, we put these crunchy, sour, fermented vegetables. And the juxtaposition of the sweet and soft and the sour and crunchy just makes a fantastic sandwich that is just loaded with antioxidants and is so healthy for you. And I'll show you how to make that a little later. But for now, we're going to make the fermented vegetables. In this dish, we're going to use a large cabbage. This is actually kind of a small one, so I've got two that I'm going to use, but I'm going to show you how to take the leaves off of this just so that you'll know. And we were going to use a red cabbage, a small red cabbage. And these are dinosaur kale. It's also called Tuscan kale. And we're using two Japanese daikon, which is a mild radish that is absolutely wonderful for pickling. And we're using 6 medium to small carrots. And well, they're varying sizes, just however many you want to use. And we're going to be using 2 tablespoons of salt, and that will help with the fermentation. Okay, so we'll get started by, we're using 2 different methods of cutting here. You have to pull this thing off the back of your cabbage. Let's set this out of the way for now. And all I'm going to show you here is how to take the leaves off. The easiest way is to cut off this piece on the bottom, and then they'll just pull right off. And you only want to take out the outer leaves that are a little damaged or old. This one actually is fine, so even though I could pull that off, I'm going to leave it on there. Okay, and I'm going to switch to the cabbages that I have already prepared and washed. So I'm going to take these kale, and the first thing I'm going to do is cut off these hard, really woody ends to them. And I'm going to pull the greens off because those are gold, and I'm not going to throw them away. It's okay to have some of this crunch in here because we do want this these fermented vegetables to be crunchy. And so we'll just cut these across. And we'll cut them in fairly thin, maybe 1/8 of an inch slices. It could be 1/4 of an inch if you like, but I think 1/8 of an inch is probably best. And this will add nutrition, and it also adds some nice color to your fermented vegetables. Okay. Now I have 2 bowls, and I'm going to separate this because we're making 2 batches, and I'll explain that more fully later. Okay. Okay, so rather than doing the cabbage first, I've decided to do the carrots. And we're going to shred them in our Cuisinart. Take out the S blade. That's important because if you leave it in, you're going to be mincing your vegetables, and we don't want to do that. And so I'm going to use the shredding blade. The way you do this is you hold this piece down with your thumb, and you snap it into place here. Just line these things up and turn it, and it snaps right into place. And then you just turn it onto this until it falls into the right slot. You can do this with a handheld grater. I always take a little skin off my knuckles when I do this, so I'm scared of that thing, and I don't like to use it. But if you're competent and can do that, you're welcome to do it. One of the things that I like to do is take I want to lock this into place, is to take this and sort of measure how wide I need to cut these, because it has a hole here that it fits into, and it has to be able to fit within that hole. So I just measure this, and then I do a cut that's slightly, well, I messed that up. I do a cut that's slightly smaller than that, so about right there. I'm getting a little crowded on here trying to show you how to do this. And then I just use this to measure the rest of it. And so they'll fit right in there. I don't necessarily use earplugs when I use this machine because it's not very loud. Okay, I need to turn it on. So that makes very quick work of shredding. I'll go ahead and cut these as well. Cut that in about half. And these pieces we won't even bother with. Okay. Now we'll take these pieces and just slice them very thin and add it to the group, to the pile. Okay, so that's our daikon. And you can see that this is very beautifully shredded. Let me take it's a little tricky going backwards. Let's get that out of the way. And see, that's a very beautiful little shred, and this is perfect for our purposes. And this is definitely a hands-on, get your fingers dirty kind of project. Now we're going to take these and divide it between these two bowls. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to weigh it or anything. You just want to get it approximately the same amount in each one. And we'll mix it up with the kale. So now we'll do the carrots exactly the same way. We'll use the same blade. There's no need to wash between batches. So, before we start with the cabbages, we're going to bring these bowls back over here. And we're going to divide the carrots into these bowls. Okay. And to these bowls, we are going to, I've got 2 tablespoons of salt. One is actually for each bowl. And so we're going to take a half a teaspoon and mix it in with this carrot, kale, and daikon mixture. If we need to add a little more, we will. But for now, we're doing just a half a teaspoon. And we're going to massage this together. And that kind of breaks up the cell walls and allows the salt to get in there. and start doing its magic. And I think this will be fun. You can already feel it starting to soften, and that's what we want. Okay, so we'll let this rest for a little while we work on the cabbages, and then we'll come back to it. Oops. We'll do the same with this one. I think a half teaspoon is just about right. Okay, so we'll massage this in here, make sure it's all covered with a little bit of the salt. And this will start leaching the liquid from the vegetables. And that will really soften these vegetables and help them to start the fermentation process. Okay, so we'll set this aside while we work on our cabbages. Okay, so I'm going to start with the red or the purple cabbage, and we're just going to cut it in half. And then we'll quarter it. We'll quarter it down the middle here. And that allows us to cut this little piece off, which we won't be using. Okay. All these pieces you cut off you can use in a broth later. So we're going to cut these into a small little threads, and try to get it fairly thin so that these pieces do not become a problem later because they're too large. If you have pieces that are just too thick, you need to either take them out or cut them up a little more, or just get rid of them. By the way, I really love this chopping board. I had this made to my specifications from a little mom and pop organization here in Southwest Virginia, and they did a beautiful job. And if you're interested in purchasing one of these boards for yourself, you can just go to my website, timeforchangekitchen.com, and I have a link to them, or information where you can find them. I think I paid around $200 for it, and it has been worth every penny. It's so nice just to be able to move your vegetables over to the side. And it's also ingrain wood, which is very gentle on your knives. Okay, so we'll add this to the other bowl. Oh, this is getting very wet, which is just what we want it to do. It's leaching, the salt is leaching the water out of the vegetables. And they become quite soft when you do that. But it's not so soft that it's not crunchy when you're finished. You know, after they've been fermenting for a couple of weeks. This process takes about a week or two. You can probably eat this after a week, but for best results, I would wait 2 weeks. Okay, boy, that's beautiful. Now that's a rainbow salad if ever I saw one. Okay, let me move this back over and we'll start on our other green cabbages. Now I've already taken the top leaves off and I've washed these very well. Okay. I think I'll do the smart thing and divide this in half first. Look how wet that's getting. You could wring this out if you want to. This is really getting nice and soft and moist. Last cabbage. So we'll let this sit for about 30 minutes and let the salt do its magic and pull some of the liquid out of this and soften it up some. And in the meantime, I'm going to wash my containers that I'm going to put them in and sterilize them and make sure that they are ready to go when this is ready to go. Okay, we'll see you in 30 minutes. Okay, we're back. So it's really been over 30 minutes. It's been closer to an hour. And our vegetables, you can see, are really, really wet. And if you pull this aside, you can see that there's a lot of moisture in the bottom that's accumulated. And that's just liquid that's been leached from the vegetables. And so now we're going to put them in jars. And I like to put them inside a clean bowl so that if we're invariably going to lose some on the side, and that just makes it easier to capture. It should take 1 jar for all of these, for each bowl. And so we'll end up with 2 half-gallon ball jars of fermented vegetables. When they, after they've fermented for about 4 days and the fermentation has slowed down, I transfer them into smaller jars so that when I eat them, I don't have to open a whole big jar. I can just open the small one. So we're really packing this in good. And I don't know if you can see it yet, but as I pack it in, the water is starting to rise in here, and you can see it. You never have to add water to this. The water will be produced by the vegetables. Okay. And we're going to take this and pour it in here. And do you see how the water is coming to the top? Now I'm going to set these later on a seedling mat. The seedling mat will keep the temperature about 20. It'll keep the temperature of the vegetables about 20 degrees above ambient temperature. I live in a cold climate, and also my countertops are all granite, so it's very hard to get my kitchen as warm as I would like it to be for fermenting vegetables or for proofing dough. So I bought these wonderful seedling mats that work perfectly for that purpose. And although it wasn't designed for that, do you see how much water is coming to the top? And what we are going to do is take this little glass weight and put on top of it, and that will help to hold it beneath the water level. Usually, I have more from one jar than this. Usually it comes all the way to the top. I didn't use as large a cabbage this time as I normally do, but this is fine. So I'm going to take this clean cloth and just wipe the rim and wipe it off a little bit. Actually, after I put the lid on it, I can I can run it under the sink and get more of this off. But we're going to put a ball lid on it, and we're going to keep it. I carrot everywhere. We're going to keep it a little bit loose, so that as this starts fermenting and bubbles come to the top, it actually acts as a vapor lock, and it will let the air out without letting fresh air in. So that's what we're doing, and this looks pretty good, and we'll set it aside and do the next one. Okay, so again, we'll look, and there's plenty of liquid down in the bottom of this. And we're going to take this and just pack it into our jars. The main thing is to get around the lip so that it'll seal well. If you can't get your hand in here to push this down, you can use a wooden spoon or something like that. And so I'm going to put this weight on it, and that'll help to hold it down. I usually like to put 2 weights, but I only have 2 of them, so I don't have much choice today. But here's something I do, because you want everything to be submerged in water. So often when I first start this, and it doesn't come all the way to the top, I'll put this lid on tightly. And I'll let it sit for 3 or 4 hours, or even 5 or 6 hours. First I'll let it sit loosely so that the air can come up and bubble out. But then I'll tighten it down and turn it over, and that makes sure that the liquid is covering both the top and the bottom. And I just keep doing that for several hours, and I may let it sit upside down overnight. But when you open it back up, be careful because you've got that glass in there. When you open it up, just gently burp it and let a little water come out at a time. If you open it up really wide, I've had it spew across the room. And another thing is this will continue to leach water out of these vegetables, and it is not uncommon for this to overflow. So I like to keep it in a saucer that's really more of a bowl-like shape to catch the water that is spewing, that is overfilling, because you don't want to ruin your countertops. And then just toss it out in the morning, because there'll still be plenty in the jar. If it's doing that, the jar is full. And it should do that. And this is what it'll look like. See how red it becomes from the red cabbage. And I've got one here. This one I didn't put any green vegetables in, and this one I did. And they're just lovely. And when this is done, I'll show you how to make the best sandwich in the world with these fermented vegetables. So we'll come back in the morning and look at it, and we'll keep checking it out for the next 4 days. And at that point, we'll transfer them to smaller jars. And you should remember when you transfer them to the final jar that you should date it. I found one in my refrigerator in my Tennessee house, stuck away in the back, and I thought, aha, I'm not out after all. And I pulled it out, and it was, I had fermented it in January 2014. So that was a bit too long. I had to throw that one out. So it's important to date this because time slips by, and you don't want to eat something that's past its prime. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. So these are our fermented vegetables. This is day 2. This is the we put these in the jar yesterday.
And and so this is how much water has accumulated overnight. And I'm just going to check and see if this is still covered in water, and it is. And if you look carefully, you can see little bubbles coming up, but I don't know if that's going to show up in the video. So it's still fermenting, and we'll keep doing this for another 3 days. And oh, I do want to mention that I started out, I've made a few changes. I've started out with 2 jars, and they weren't quite full, and I didn't like that. I like for it to be completely full so that the juice will always be covering the vegetables. You don't want to let any part of it become dry, and so I transferred some of the vegetables back into this jar, and then put the rest in a smaller jar. And so that's why we have 2 different jars now. I also took the glass cubes out because they're no longer needed, because these vegetables are completely covered in water, and or rather the juice from the vegetables. Okay, so we'll do the same thing tomorrow. Okay, so this is day 3. You can see how much moisture is accumulated in the bottom of this. I actually emptied this out twice yesterday, and I'm just opening this to show you how the bubbles are accumulating, and how you can push this down. I like to push it down with a wooden spoon once a day. There are tappers made for this, but a spoon is just fine. And to make sure all the vegetables are submerged. And but you can see how it's still fermenting, and how much bubbles are still coming up to the top. And you can also see that the color is starting to change, and it's becoming darker and redder. And we'll take a look at the other one. This one isn't leaching quite as much, and you can see the bubbles rising on the top of this one. And it's still quite actively fermenting. Okay, so we'll be back tomorrow and see where we are then. Okay, we're on day 4 of the fermented vegetables, and they're not spilling into the bowl anymore. I did have to empty it another time yesterday, and I really expected it to have some spillage overnight, but you can see how it's still fermenting, and the bubbles are coming to the top quite nicely. Okay, and so we're going to put this back on. I will probably transfer these tonight. If there's no more spillage throughout the day, I will probably transfer these to smaller jars tonight. If you have them in smaller jars, it's more manageable. And we'll do the same in this one. We'll probably put these in pint jars. Okay, and see, you can see it's still bubbling up. And they're still covered with water, so it's doing exactly what it should. And see how pink it's become. There are areas like down here where it's still relatively green, and over here we have some areas that are still fairly green, but those will develop over time, even after we've transferred them to smaller jars. And when we transfer them to the smaller jars, we'll go ahead and cap them, and just burp them once or twice a day. And so there you have it. So we'll look at these again tonight, and if they're not spilling over, I'm going to go ahead and transfer them to smaller jars, and then we just proceed to burp them until they stop releasing gas, and then you cap them tightly and store them for whenever you need to use them in the coming year. Okay, so this is the evening of the 4th day. I have there has been no bubbling over of the water anymore. It's still fermenting, but it's not fermenting as aggressively as it did before. I took the half-gallon jar that we did and I transferred it to these pint jars, and so it made 3.5 pints. And so I'm compacting those as much as I can as we go, and I'm going to show you how I transfer them, but it's not a big deal, but you might want to see it. And so we're going to take this, I'm going to move it over here as close as I can, and I'm using these tongs to just pull them out and transfer them. And we pack it just as full as we can. I'll take a clean cloth that's damp and I'll wipe around the edges. And tighten this down, and then I'll rinse off the body of this. Because these are still fermenting, we're not going to leave them capped all the time. About twice or 3 times a day, we're going to burp them, which just means release the pressure and you'll hear a little gas escape, and then you tighten it back up. And if you leave it too long and this starts to buckle, you probably should do it over the sink so you don't get sprayed with this stuff. You can hear that already, just a little bit of gas escaping. And what I'll probably do is put these in saucers and leave them loose overnight. But I wanted to get these transferred mainly because I'm going to be out of town and my husband has to watch them for me. So it's easier for him to burp them than do all the transferring himself. So we'll do one more. So you press it down really hard until the water is covering it. And it holds far more than you think it will. By filling it, by packing it tight like this, you're making sure it's covered with water. And that keeps it from drying out. And it protects it a little from anything floating around in the air. I have a little bit left, and I think I'll go through the others that I have and just make sure that they're as full as they can be, because you can always usually get a little more in there. Okay, I think that's as good as that one's going to get. Ooh, this will hold some more. So when I said before I misjudged how much cabbage I had, I thought I had at least a full head, large head of cabbage using those two smaller ones, and it wasn't really quite. But when I use a really large head of cabbage, I usually get 2 full half-gallon jars, and that will give me 7 of these. Today we're going to content ourselves with 5. Okay, so you want to make sure that everything is covered with liquid, because keeping it covered with liquid not only keeps it from drying out, but it also keeps the air out. Okay. Okay, like I said, this is the evening of the 4th day. So at this point, I've removed them from the heating mat, and that will slow down the fermentation a little bit. And so my husband will be kind enough to burp these for me. Actually, I'll leave them open until tomorrow when I leave. And if they spill over, then we'll treat them just like we did the bigger jars. As a matter of fact, you can always start out by using these smaller jars. But because they compact and as they ferment, I like to start with a larger jar and then pack them down to the final product, which is this. And because I like to make sure they're covered in liquid, and that's how we'll store them. And so when they stop releasing gas when you burp them, then we'll just tighten them up and either put them in an extra refrigerator or put them down in a cool pantry. I like to keep mine in my basement, and they'll be good for a year. And be sure to mark them, because time will pass by before you know it, and you'll find that you have 4-year-old fermented vegetables, and you don't want to eat those. Okay, I think in another week it would be acceptable to eat these. They'll be tart, but they won't be fully mature for another 2 or 3 weeks. And the longer they sit, the more sour they become, and the nicer they are, especially if you're going to serve them with something sweet. That juxtaposition of sweet and sour are really fantastic together. And I will have a video on how to make a great sandwich using this. So there you have it. Wonderful fermented vegetables that you can use as a condiment. You can use it on sandwiches or anything you choose. I'm Danielle Bassoni, serving up whole foods for whole health.